First of all, we want to thank you both for participating with us today. We're really grateful to have you with us.
Yeah, so grateful. And I always enjoy what you have to share and the stories that you tell. I think you're such a beautiful couple, and I'm thrilled that we get to share you with our audience.
Yes. And how long have the two of you been married?
It'll be 52 years next month.
Yeah, 52 years next month.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's really beautiful. So I'm guessing there's a thing or two that you've seen along those 52 years of our relationship.
We're still seeing a thing or two.
Yeah.
Yes. So I think one of the places to start would be if you're willing to just share some of what your journey of learning has been like, being married for 52 years, being in relationship together, and what are the things that stand out to you in terms of your learning curve with having a relationship that is not just has the longevity, but also has the closeness and is enjoyable.
Well, shall I?
I was going to just jump in and
Go
say
for
that
it.
we felt like we were friends when we met.
Yeah.
We were friends first, and then, about a month later we realized. But so I still feel like I'm with my best friend.
Same here. Same here. It's our story has its ups and downs, but one of the things that occurred to me a while back was that discovering these principles and this understanding is much the same as falling in love. In the sense that when you first meet and you fall in love, you really don't care about the details around the person, their habits or whatever. You want to get close soul to soul. And that's what happens when you gain some understanding of people and their psychological innocence. You're not looking at their behavior and the details. So I was not in great shape as a young man when we met. I had come out of a difficult upbringing, with violence and alcoholism and all that kind of stuff. But when we met, that just all fell away. We ended up in trouble over time with our relationship, but the first 2 or 3 years were great. We just had a good time. We weren't thinking about all that stuff. And my depression and my anger towards the world fell away for 2 or 3 years, and I find that interesting when we think about it. Like, it was great in the beginning, but slowly, my past, I didn't know how to let it go. I hadn't learned how to let it go yet. And that began to poison me first again, and then our relationship.
But really, what just came to me, I love the way you two are operate, that this is just kind of, as we talk, we let the things come out, that we don't have, nothing was planned. We just knew we were talking to Rohini and Angus, who we love. We love you too. And such a beautiful couple yourselves, honestly. So I didn't have any thoughts about today, but as we started talking, it just hit me that being present, living in the now, which was what we were searching to do and trying to do and studying before we met Sid Banks many years ago. That was our goal, to learn to live in the now. And so it's still something I'm learning, and in a whole new level every day, how to be present. And so as we're sitting here, I realize that the gift is with the understanding that we've been fortunate enough to come across, is that it deepens your ability to be present in every second of your life. So in terms of our relationship, I'm looking at Chip and I'm thinking that sometimes I'm preoccupied and I'm thinking about other things. And as everyone knows, after 52 years, you think you know somebody. After 1 year, you think you know. And so that feeling of falling in love seems like it's something that just happens when you first meet, and then after that it's just, same kind of thing. But it's like when you learn to live in the now, and in the spiritual sense, like the now being an awareness of what's really happening, instead of being caught up in your internal dialogue, you're present with the moment. And so that allows you to really see what you're observing in the moment, and hear. And so when I look at Chip, it's like the more my mind is calm and quiet, and I'm feeling I'm living in more of a spiritual reality, I really see Chip, and I don't think, I'm not up here in my head with my own dialogue, like what am I going to say next in this conversation or any other conversation, or waiting for him to do the same behavior he does all the time, like watching for his habits and trying to correct them. I feel like the gift is being able to really hear and see another soul. And that, I believe that's the whole key to how our relationship gets more beautiful all the time.
Yeah, for sure. It's like we joke about it, but I really know that I don't know Jan. Like, of course I do in terms of things I'm familiar with, but she's changing constantly, as she learns and she grows. And if I'm open to seeing that, if I'm in the moment, if I'm in the now, that becomes obvious to me. And so when people talk about being bored in their relationships, or we've known each other for so long, that's only in one world. The deeper world where where boredom is impossible. It's just not possible. Right? And so for us, somebody was asking me the other day, like, oh, you've been around this for so long, it must be like kind of repetitive kind of thing. And I said, actually, this is the very best part of our marriage right now. After all these years, it just keeps getting better. And I actually feel like I'm in kindergarten with it. I feel like we're just beginning to learn. And there was a day when that would have frustrated me, that after 50 years. But now the way I look at it is it's just amazing. Like, there's no end to learning, and there's no end to learning how to be in the now and to see each other, and it's the seeing, like going back to what I said about when you fall in love, that's all that's really happening then, is you're seeing that person. You're not looking at the details. You don't care about the details when it first begins, just that feeling, right? But that's available. I mean, after 50 some years, it's still available to us to be in that moment, have that feeling, and not be concerned about the details. So sometimes when we see people as couples in our work, we seldom see them together to begin with. But what we're really looking for in seeing them individually is to help them get into that quiet state, to do whatever we can to facilitate them letting go of whatever detail they're thinking of about the other person, about themselves, about the world. Because the solution in helping them is for them to see a new world. Not to follow some new idea of what behavior should be or not be, to actually see a new world.
That's so powerful, and I'd love to explore that, but I'd like to explore it in the way that happened with the two of you, because Chip, when you were talking about how when you and Jan were together at the beginning of the relationship, you fell into a new world, right? You were suffering based on your family of origin, history, and what you were caught up in within yourself. And then you meet Jan, you fall in love, and all of a sudden you're living in a new world, and it lasts for a few years. And I think this is so common for people to have that experience of grace when they fall in love, and it could last for a week, a month, 2 years. But I think many people have that experience, but think it's something to do with the person, and think that then when that experience goes away, that that's also something to do with the person.
Yeah, for sure.
And that it's time to now look for a new person. So if you could just speak a little bit more to what you experienced with that shift. And then, as you alluded to, it lasted for a few years, but then all of that conditioned thinking started to come back in. And we know your story. So we know that you came across the understanding that Sydney Banks was sharing and how that was so supportive to both of you, but our listeners don't necessarily know that. So I think that would be wonderful if you're open to looking in that direction.
Sure.
So you're talking about the shift from the original shift from the happy to the unhappy?
So there was that initial shift from unhappy to being happy, falling in love. And then the shift back to gradually getting unhappy again and having the relationship suffer as a result of that. But then I know that there was another shift coming. So.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like in falling in love, you let go. Sorry.
Well, first the shift from having that beautiful few years and then falling into not feeling as much love, like being more conscious of each other's behavior. And that was, to me, when I look back, we had gotten really serious about the spiritual search in life.
Mm-hmm.
So we were consciously trying to learn more about enlightenment and practicing, enlightenment techniques and different meditations and rituals. So that we got so serious about that and we thought we were heading in the right direction, but that was actually what was taking its toll on our relationship, was us getting so serious.
Well, that was definitely a big part of it. It's like, along with that, thinking there's something to find and fix, comes judgment of yourself and of your partner and the world around you. I mean, when I think about how judgmental we were, even as a couple, of all of our neighbors and friends,
And family.
And family, it's particularly family. That definitely contributed to it's a strange thing to say that our search for our spiritual understanding actually contributed to me going back into my past and Jan, our relationship falling down. But to me, there's like that falling in love and not looking at the details. It's the same process as when you learn and understand, in the sense that you're letting go of thought. You're just there, you're present, and you love that presence and you love the feeling, but you don't have an understanding of why that's occurring. You think you do, but you don't, like you were saying, Rohini. Okay? And because you don't have understanding, you can't keep it. And that's what happened with us. We had something, but then we went searching.
Right.
But it only took one of us to catch on that we were on the wrong track. And it only took one of us to have an insight that what life is not people's behavior. Who people aren't their behavior. So my insight was, I had thought I was my behavior and Chip was his behavior, and the behavior at that time was horrible. So we were both feeling that. And then, but when I had an insight that there's something deeper, who we really are is something, a soul, a pure soul, a pure essence, that change in myself actually generated that that new understanding for both of us, but which showed me again that you can't fix anyone, and you can live just in taking care of your own health, and that we, even though we love each other and we would miss each other if we weren't together. What you were saying, Rohini, is it's like a spiritual independence that you find you have to always start with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And in terms of working with couples, that example continues to be at the core of our understanding of how to help people, that it really doesn't, as soon as one person shifts, the relationship has changed forever. Now, you can't guarantee that the other person will, but to use a baseball analogy, your batting average goes way up because one person drops out of the game. And that's what happened with us. Jan just dropped out of the game, and I didn't know what to do with that. It was very confusing. We'd been arguing and fighting, and we didn't have our divorce papers in hand, but we were close to it, And then Jan had an insight, and literally in one day came home a different person. And that was very confusing to me because I had all my ideas of what one had to do to make that happen. The rituals, the study, the meditation, the whole thing. And I couldn't comprehend somebody going and listening to somebody for an hour or so and having a complete change. I thought it was a put on. So it was very confusing to me. But I think this has happened many, many times through the course of this understanding. It's the fact that Jan's change was sustained. I could pull her back a little bit here and there. I could get her upset, but it never lasted. And I could always see her returning to that home base, so to speak. And that eventually changed my confusion to curiosity. And it was hard to get me curious because I thought I knew the way the world was constructed. But once that happened and I listened a little bit, then a new element came into my thinking. Instead of just my belief system, the element of hope entered my thinking, which opened up, possibilities that were closed to me before. Hope changes the direction of your thinking. So when one person changes in the relationship, the possibility of hope coming in for the other person is established. The other person may not take it. I came really close to not taking it, to tell you the truth. I was so lost. But think of it this way, if Jan hadn't had that change and that possibility wasn't in front of me, there would have been no hope, no possibility. So the batting average was multiplied infinitely by that change.
There's something in that change, and I feel like a big part of this experience for me, because Rohini became the enlightened one, shall we say, in our journey together. And I feel like I've had conversations with various clients on this level, but I feel like what really changed for me and what I was noticing about Rohini is that the judgment disappeared. All I was experiencing from Rohini was this sense that she really believed that I was suffering with my thinking. And I think it was that compassion that I recognized in her that was void of any sense of judgment that allowed me to have room to breathe. I think if she had been showing up from a place of judgment in terms of how I was behaving or how I was showing up, then we would have just locked swords and we would have been back to where we started. But the fact that she showed up with this sense that I was suffering and had compassion for it, that was the secret sauce that changed things in our relationship. I feel like that's what I'm hearing from you guys.
Yeah, I think I had sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think I had a similar insight to Jan, where I really was very judgmental about Angus's behavior if he was irritable or angry or, not behaving in the way that I thought he should be, that I made him wrong in my mind and felt like he needed to change. Like that was my arrogance. And it was very difficult, if not impossible, for me to see how cruel I was being in that judgmental stance that I was taking. And I wasn't seeing my own arrogance and lack of humility. And so when I was able to recognize that we behave in unkind ways when we're caught up and we're suffering, and that's the best we know how to do in the moment to try and discharge some of that internal pressure, that it isn't personal. Like that was huge for me to be able to see that. And that before that, every time I felt the pain, so immediately if Angus said something to me that was angry, it really did look like he caused me to feel a certain way. I wasn't seeing the role of thought, my own thinking in that. I wasn't seeing that it wasn't what he said and what he did. It was my own self-judgment that was telling me, I've done something wrong. I'm not good enough. I'm unworthy. Like that's what I was feeling, but I just didn't see it. And so when I had a glimpse into like, that's just him suffering, it didn't hurt me anymore without him changing. And that's why when Angus said, and it's not that I'm never judgmental anymore, I want to be clear about that. But when I was able to see his psychological innocence, it wasn't just for him. It was so liberating for me to be able to see his psychological innocence. I stopped suffering. And actually then, as he's saying, had some compassion for his suffering. And I would say that's really was so transformative in our relationship. And I think why we're so passionate about sharing this with other people, because we feel like we're slow learners. We've been married a very long time before we saw that. And it's like, if we can see it, other people can see it too.
Wow.
But in terms of that shift, so you had your insight, Jan, that really sounds like helped you to stay more connected with that well-being within yourself and to not take Chip's behavior personally and have compassion for him. And Chip, you said that it was confusing, but it gave you some hope. So what was it like then for you in terms of your own personal journey with your own insight? How did that unfold?
Well, you know, that confusion at the beginning was all consuming. There was no hope in that confusion. I just want to clarify that. It was the fact that I saw something sustained and knew that it was more than, you know, just a thing that was going to pass. I could see that Jan was a different person. Right? And I think probably the first little bit of recognition of that fact is where the hope steps in, right? Because if it's there, it's possible. And so once I got a little bit of curiosity, I did start listening to Jan, and then eventually to some moments with Sid, sometimes with Sid. And I still was very skeptical of Sid, you know, like there's no way that some welder doesn't come along and, you know, I had so many ideas about that, but I did start listening, and I think I started having some small insights. What was very interesting to me when I look back on it now is from the time that Jan met Sid and had her experience to when our marriage completely flipped around, it was probably 2 to 3 weeks at the most, you know, but I still didn't understand. And when I look back at it now, this is what fascinates me. That change, all of a sudden, everything, not everything, but it was so much better. And we weren't fighting and arguing. We had a nice feeling in the house. And I could not put my finger on what we had done or not done or changed. And I still can't. It just changed, right? And so that, when I look back, is amazing to me because, I mean, I have some understanding of why that is now, but even so, it was miraculous in that sense, and that there wasn't anything we had to do. There was no doing, it just happened. And then after listening for a while and having a bit of a feeling about it and listening to Sid, I had the experience of still kind of being in my head and being up one morning early and sitting on the couch, and Jan was on the floor playing with our 3-year-old son. And the morning light was coming in at a really steep angle, early morning light, and it was shining in their hair, and it kind of caught my attention. And I looked over at them, and this feeling just rushed in, just whoosh, you know, and I became very emotional. And I just felt all of these feelings I hadn't felt maybe since Jan and I first met. It just rushed in. And I really didn't understand what was happening, but the thought occurred to me when I saw this, that the only thought I had was all I have to do is surrender, and there's nothing to do, you know. And everything changed for us after that. You know, I just began to let go of things. And it really, it took me a long time to understand what that moment was. You know, and it was later, after listening more to Sid and getting more understanding, that I saw that that was my first experience of actually seeing, of being in that neutral state. It's whatever thinking I had fell away, and I saw Jan, and I saw our son, and I knew, somehow knew, that what I was seeing was the true reality, you know, and that the rest was just, it was just an illusion, just thought. I knew that was the true reality. And one of the things I love about all of this is that particular insight, that seeing, is still teaching me today. It's basically the same thing. Either I see Jan and what's really in front of me and see this world, or I'm in my head. It's one or the other. But seeing, as simple as it is, I mean, it's so amazingly simple, it's hard to explain. And yet that simplicity teaches you for the rest of your life, shows you what is real and what is not, and allows you the freedom to choose what is real. And what is real is always more beautiful than what is not. Always. It's guaranteed. It's just too simple.
It is simple, but that falling out of the illusion isn't necessarily that easy. But the way that you both describe it is that it's something that just happens. And I think this is a really important point that you're making, is that you talk about how when you were both seeking that, because it sounds like you were both really working very hard to fall out of thought. And it was actually taking you in a direction, it sounds like, where you were getting more caught up in thought. And I can relate to this, and I'm guessing other people will be able to relate to that too. So I'm just wondering if there's anything more that either of you would like to say about that, because it seems very paradoxical.
Well, when you just said it, it's not easy to fall into it. It's that actually the falling into it is the easy part. So that for me, trying to be this improved version of myself by the search, you know, that the wanting to be a better person, which I thought the way to do that is you go to Eastern religion, and I was raised, you know, in a Orthodox religion, you know, Catholicism, and so, but I had not wanted to continue practicing, so I didn't believe in rituals. So then what do? I go into the rituals of Eastern religion, you know, like in Zen meditation, and so so that was me trying to find myself. But when it was time for me to hear from my true self, it just happened. I just happened to be with some friends who were visiting this person, Sydney Banks, who we'd heard about, but we weren't interested because we felt he wasn't authentic. You know, how could someone from our local area who was just an ordinary middle-class person, how could they have, you know, be enlightened? And so, but then I just happened to be with some friends who were visiting him, and ended up in his living room one day when he was had some friends over. He and his wife had some friends over, and he in the middle of this, you know, social visit with them, and I was just an innocent bystander. I was very shy at the time. I was just waiting for my friends to take me back home, you know, and then all of a sudden he looks over and says, if everyone could see who they really are, how beautiful they really are inside, and there's a whole other part of them that they don't, if they got to know that part of them, they'd have all the happiness they could ever imagine. And in that moment, I wasn't looking to get anything. I was just waiting you know, waiting it out till my friends brought me home, and boom, I heard something that broke through the radar when Sid said that. And I remember the feeling of, if before that someone had said, "Oh, you're such a beautiful person," I would be like deflecting it, because that's my image of myself was so low at that point. Like I was a really helpless and insecure person, and my life was like super unhappy, because I was blaming everyone in the world and every event on my unhappiness. So all of a sudden, I opened up to hearing that, like, there's all this beauty in me that I didn't know about, and I let it in. I let that feeling in, and it wasn't. Now I look back, and I wasn't hearing it about my personal self. I was hearing that there's this beauty within, and for some reason, just letting that in and allowing it to be true in that split second wiped away all my thinking in that split second about any insecurity. I totally gave in to that feeling that, yes, who I am is this amazing pure essence, and all healthy, and everything was all in a feeling. And I knew that the rest of my life was going to be beautiful. And this metaphor happened in my head of this pathway spread out in front of me, and that was my life. And it was no details, just like this empty pathway, but I knew everything was going to be okay, including my marriage. It was a knowing. And then in the next second, I realized that the wisdom had to be coming from in me, that because of what all the wise people had always been saying, that you can only find wisdom in yourself. It occurred to me that it looks like the wisdom is coming from this man in front of me who's talking, but it has to be coming from in me. How could I hear it otherwise? And so that in that moment, I knew that I'd always had wisdom, and I'd have it for the rest of my life. And that was a split second. I fell into it. I gave up the struggle, and I didn't even give up the struggle. It just happened. That was my moment. So
you can't make it happen, but you can be open to its happening. You know? And that's what listening's about. Listening isn't about making it happen. Listening is the portal to that quiet mind where that possibility exists. You know, listening at the deepest level to somebody who knows something, but listening at the deepest level, you really can't think and listen at the same time in that sense. You know, it's a mathematical impossibility. You're either doing one or the other, you know. And so what we have in this opportunity to learn is the possibility to listen to somebody speaking from that true reality. Right? And when we listen quietly enough, and our ideas fall away, our thinking falls away, our concept of the world falls away, and we're in the now, then we see it's got nothing, as Jan was saying, it's got nothing to do with who's talking at that moment. You know, I mean, I'm grateful for who was talking, believe me. But in that moment, it's you stepping through that portal. And so you can't make it happen, but you can be open to it. And if you're open to it, you listen. And if you don't, you don't. You know, it's pretty simple that way. But I honestly think, like, there are no accidents in that sense. Like anybody listening to this podcast right now, you're here because you're here. You're here because you're listening. You're here in the same way that Jan ended up in that house in Salt Spring, and I ended up in our cabin listening to her. You're here because there are no accidents. You know, it's I guess I kind of romanticize this, but when we were first married and we were having a great time, as a kid, I had run away from central Canada out to Vancouver. I loved Vancouver. Yeah. When I met Jan, I mean, I was only 18 when we met. You know, we were kids. And we get married, and I just would go on and on about we have to move to Vancouver. Jan's whole family, her whole life was in Toronto, and she would say, "Oh, I can't do that," you know. And then one day she just decided we would do that. But I remember just before that, we had one of those nights as a couple where we talked all night. And what we were talking about was the way we were raised and this great feeling we had now. And there must be something out there. There must be something, some understanding that can preserve this and help the world. And we committed in that conversation to looking for it, and then proceeded to look in the wrong direction. But we did. And we traveled, we loaded our little Beetle, our Volkswagen, and we traveled almost 3,000 miles. We had no money, you know, we stayed in our tent in the national parks as we crossed Canada. And this phenomena started to happen. We would set up camp and we'd hear a guitar and we'd go and play some music with some people we didn't know. And then we'd fall into these conversations like we had that night, like, well, what is it? You know, why are we here? What's the spiritual? Where's the spiritual? And this would happen repeatedly as we crossed the country. We'd end up in these conversations, and we were just kids, you know. But these conversations, we were feeling something, right? So years later, we meet Sid, and our life is turned around. And for some reason, after dinner, we're telling them about that story of how we had that conversation and then crossed the country, met all these people, and had these amazing conversations. And when we finished telling the story, Sid goes, "You know who those people were, don't you?" And I said, "No, we've never seen them again. One person we knew." But he said, "You know who they were?" No, we don't know who they were. And Sid just smiled. He said, "They were you." And to me, that's what this journey looks like. There are no accidents. You know? We end up in a place where we're listening to knowledge just because it's our time to put ourselves there. And all it requires is listening.
I was reflecting on so much of what you've shared thus far, but I love this idea that this truth that we fall through this portal into a spiritual reality. We suddenly have that understanding or a sense of that understanding. And I think that couples get together and they have this first experience of romantic love, and that maybe cannot be sustained at that level of intensity for any prolonged period of time, that eventually, let's say, softens. And then to have this portal of understanding, the spiritual awakening, which is what it sounds like, where you start to view the world through that lens, and that your partner really suddenly becomes this reflection of that spiritual understanding, that something that you've seen in yourself is now reflected in them, because on a universal level, we're all brothers and sisters together playing this game of life. And I so love that idea, because I had this thought that a few years ago, I guess before the pandemic, you can go and play these games, and we would do it as a family. They're called escape rooms.
Oh,
I don't know if you've heard of this.
yeah, I've seen sitcoms where people do that.
Yeah, that's right. So they have these escape rooms, and they basically, you have to go into these sort of environments where it's set up so you have to figure out how to get from one room to another, and all these different clues and all these different puzzles that you have to figure out. When we go in as a family, and you kind of have to all really work together. Like someone will be good at figuring out one kind of puzzle, and someone will be good at figuring out another kind of puzzle. And for me, it's kind of like, what I see now is like life is just like this one big beautiful game, and that our partner really is just another reflection of that spiritual understanding. and that they're having moments of clarity, and we kind of glorify in those moments of clarity in the same way that I would glorify at my youngest daughter suddenly figuring out how to figure out this puzzle. It's like, that's how I see us playing the game of life. We are all spiritual beings having this incredible human experience. And every now and again, someone has a moment of clarity and it's like, oh, there it is. They're really tuned in, and you're reminded of who you really are at your core. And I feel like that's what you're sharing. You suddenly have this moment of understanding, and you get to see who we all really are. We're all really the spiritual, essential nature that is that intelligence behind life. And it's such a beautiful feeling. And we kind of go in and out of it. And those moments when we're in it is just such a feeling of grace. And to be in partnership and union with another individual and just get to see that reflected back to us at every turn is just what a gift. And yet we get so attached to this idea of the romantic lover and what love and what that means. And that's obviously a beautiful thing, but the real richness of the relationship is in that reflection of that spiritual essential nature being shown to us and demonstrated to us. And I love what you see and how you share this.
Oh, thank you. That was beautiful.
Absolutely.
Angus.
Absolutely.
And what hit me is, seeing it that way really does smooth out everything in life, where you have like the typical day in relationships where people have judgmental feelings, or they, get angry with each other. Behavior can be, like have a lot of friction. But the deeper you go into this understanding, it takes care of all of that. And yet you're still human. Like, you said, Rohini, sometimes you still have judgmental thoughts, but it gets nicer and nicer. And even when things come up that seem like real challenges in family relationships, you just, for me, I just leave it alone. I don't try and fix it. I just know things will smooth out. And that is an amazing gift. Mm-hmm. So we're still living a human life, but we're living it with more of a feeling of love and understanding. And so you trust in life, and you know that everybody will see it in their own time. And that's why I think it's easier in relationships to not be bothered by other people's behavior, because well, they'll get it. They'll get it. It's not up to me to force them to see something. And so you just sit back and you relish your own experience of life. And that's how this understanding is spread to other people, is people see someone having a beautiful experience of life, and it inspires them. So you don't try and change people. You just live it yourself,
Yeah.
Having said that, that's really kind of the way we live. But every once in a while, there might be some habit I have that's kind of chronic and gets in the way. But we find ourselves laughing and talking about it when we're in a good state of mind, right? We don't try and convince one another that this is wrong or that's wrong. But it isn't that we don't ever address anything. Right. We do, but it's usually, when we're smart, at least, it's when we're in a nice feeling. And it just seems obvious. Okay, and if you see that, but you don't go beyond observation. Just all you need is the observation. The second you go beyond observation to judgment, or I must change, or all of that, you're back in it. Right? But when you just observe, and you've had the benefit of having a quiet mind, and kind of, I guess the way I would put it, you actually see the game of life, then that observation becomes valuable, right? Not through effort, just through understanding.
It's amazing how leveraged understanding is. And when you said that word trust, Janet, really jumped out at me, that we're looking at how we can trust our essential nature of love. And that's why Angus and I use the rewilding metaphor, because we look to nature and how there's always this incredible impulse for nature to express, and to express in the most healthy, vibrant way possible. And that's just how nature works. Whether there's concrete on the ground, it's still going to try and have some grass grow through that at some point. And that love that's within us, our spiritual nature, wants to be expressed. It's here to be expressed, and we can trust that. And when we're working less and trusting more, there's so much more room for the health of that expression to come forward in ways that we can enjoy. Versus, I know for myself, when I get into more of a controlling mindset and think I know best, or think things need to be a certain way, then it's actually working against that innate state of love. And not that it can get rid of it, but it can be uncomfortable for a while. And I think that that's what happens in relationship. We get anxious about things, we get insecure about things, and rather than seeing that that's our state of mind and that we're in that reality of insecurity for that moment, and that's temporary, it's going to pass, we then react to it and think we need to fix something or change our partner or make them different so that we can feel more comfortable. And that's when things tend to spiral downward. At least I know they did for us.
Yeah. And in a sense, what you're saying, working less and trusting more, is kind of what you're saying, Chip. It's like, it's you don't have to do more, you have to listen. You don't have to engage the critical machinery. You can just listen.
Yeah, for sure.
And that,
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chip. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say, like, we all have to learn to trust that. Like, our habit throughout our life is to try and figure it out. We've been taught to try and figure it out for our entire life. Our intellect has operated in that mode for our entire life. And, you know, in spite of the evidence that it hasn't worked. That's the part that gets me, you know, in spite of the evidence. But when you first experiment, if you want, just trusting, just being quiet, and you see the outcome, then it gets easier to trust it. But it does take a little bit when you first come across this understanding to really trust that. I guess at the deepest level of trust, that everything actually is okay. There really isn't a problem. But it does take a while, just because that's who we are. That's how we're habitualized.
Yeah, we're taught or we're conditioned to almost worship the intellect in a sense, and to not really listen more deeply to a different kind of knowing that is within ourselves, that we all have. The way you talked about it, Jan, you realize that, wait, this is coming from inside of me. Like, even though Sydney Banks said something to you, the realization was your own wisdom being revealed to you in that moment. And that we all have that, and that it's right there, but we don't always look in that direction. We're not always listening for that kind of knowing. We are often more captivated by the noise in our head rather than that space of presence that you both spoken to so beautifully. But that it's equal. Everybody has it. There's no greater or less than. Sure. It's just the difference might be that some are more willing to listen to it than others. Some are more willing perhaps to trust it than others, but that it's there in equal amounts.
For sure. I love when Sid would say, sometimes talking to a group, he would look at one person in the group and say, there's nobody on this planet any wiser than you. And that's not a philosophical statement. It's a statement of fact. And when we keep that in mind, well, with everybody we encounter, but particularly around our relationships, it does, we go to the same ground equally, and we share that ground equally, you know. And we learn from the inside instead of the outside. It is eloquently simple. And sometimes that's the problem.
Right. We're like, this can't be it. What else is there? This can't be enough.
Yeah, because our intellect won't accept that that's okay.
You know, I love when we talk about the intellect, because the thing that's been occurring to me more in the last few years is that the intellect's not the enemy. It's only how we're using it that's the problem, right? And when we find that deeper understanding, when we get quiet, when we're in the now, then the intellect becomes this incredible tool that it was meant to be, rather than something that we're allowing to control our experience. It's not the enemy.
Yeah, it's an incredible piece of technology. It's kind of like a 3D printer, right?
Oh yeah.
It doesn't use it's not the source of the creativity, but it's very good at executing the form of that creativity.
Absolutely. And when we drop out of habitual thinking, then that's where new thought, genius comes from.
Yeah.
You know, I used to think that genius was the speed of this computer, its storage capacity, our retrieval capacity, but that's not what genius is.
Yeah.
Maybe part of it in some people's eyes. Genius is the ability to access new thought, original thought. And that's also what we do when, as a couple, we drop out of our belief system about each other, you know.
Right.
We go to original thought together, and the feeling has got to be amazing. It's absolutely amazing.
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing us back to that, because that was what was said at the beginning. I think you said it, Jan, like the key to relationship is that space of presence. Yeah. And that when we're in that space of presence, that's when we're in the fresh thinking. We're not in our habitual thoughts about what happened even 5 seconds ago. We're just here now. And it's so rare to be in that space. It's not necessarily the norm for people. I know that I spend a lot of my day where I'm just, in my head, but when I drop into that space of presence, it's just so heart opening. And that feeling of being resourced by that is so beautiful. And it's funny that the habits can be so strong because the feeling is so good. You think, well, we should be there all of the time. Like, what's the matter? But it's so easy to get caught up in the unconscious thought patterns. But the feeling, I think, is that beautiful guide that lets us know, are we here now? Am I seeing Angus in the present moment? Or am I seeing him through the lens of some kind of judgment of my own conditioning?
It's a delicate balance, because I know from my personal experiences that you have to have a degree of acceptance of your humanity, that you will have thought again, you will get caught up, and just to be kind to yourself, just like everybody else. It's no big deal, It's that being kind to yourself, that whatever level of acceptance of our humanity is an important part of the growth of this, because it can send you backwards quickly if you get judging yourself.
I love the idea that there would be, there would be these moments of grace where you might experience well-being, you might fall into that beautiful feeling. And then I feel like my intellect is like, well, let's map it out. Let's find out how we get back there as quickly as possible. How do we sustain this?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's write an instruction manual.
Exactly. Let's write a reference guide, and we're right back in our humanity, and the feeling is gone. It's kind of like we have no control. It's like acceptance and surrender. It's like it just comes through grace, and I guess that's just how it meant to be. But our critical mind so wants that reference guide.
That's one of the things I loved about talking to Sid, was that when he was in a certain mood, he just saw the humor and all that. He didn't laugh at you. He really laughed with you, but he did laugh. He did laugh. We got a call one morning. We were living on Salt Spring. And Sid said that, I'm working on this book. Will you two come over and work with me? And I'm like, oh God, I'm in a bad mood. I don't want to see Sid. Geez, And I knew I had to go, and Jan's like in the car, oh boy, this is, and I'm like, I don't want to go. It was just one of those moods, and we get there, and of course Sid and Jan start laughing and having a good time, and I hate it, like, geez. So I couldn't stand it anymore, and I went in the kitchen to pretend to make some tea, I think, just to get away from them. And I'm out there, oh geez, I gotta shake this mood or whatever. And I'm walking back out. I had a tray of tea, and Sid comes to he meets me in the doorway. He poked me in the shoulder. He just looked at me with this big smile on his face. He says, "Give it up, Chip." And just cracked up, and I started cracking up, and the three of us are then in the living room. We don't know what we're laughing at exactly, but we're just laughing. I love that, that
Yeah.
he saw the innocence of it, and he saw the humor in it too. That we're funny we beings and doing our thing. That helped me. That moment helped me a lot. Just the humor in it.
Yeah.
Give it up. Okay.
There's so much resilience in that. And I think that for me, yes, Angus and I have so many more experiences where we're in a beautiful feeling, where we're just, enjoying each other's company. But I think what I'm most grateful for, I'm grateful for that, but what I'm most grateful for is how this understanding allows me to be resilient in the times when we're not having that. Like, I think that's what I have the most gratitude for, because that is when I used to really spiral downwards and think that I wasn't okay and that things needed to change or I needed to be with somebody else. And now to just be able to be with humanness, my own humanness and his humanness, without needing to fix it, without thinking that I need to work on improving myself. Like, self-improvement was so exhausting, a huge part of my life. And to be able to put that down is really freeing. And I'm just incredibly grateful for that. And I know you are too, Angus.
No, without doubt.
Because I wasn't only trying to improve myself, I was always trying to improve you too.
Well,
that was beautiful. And what hit me, that one thing you could add to the list that we hear all the time with people struggling in a relationship is, I don't feel appreciated. And that is like, I could do that, anytime, just
all day long.
And it doesn't have to have any even reason for it, but if I'm tired and I'm out of it. And so that what I've learned is, the only person who can really appreciate you is yourself, appreciating your true self and accepting, like you say, accepting your humanness and the beauty of your really beautiful, innocent, personal self, and just seeing it as beautiful in all its little, ups and downs, and just seeing your innocence. So you can appreciate and just kind of shrink your world. And it's Sid used to say in the beginning, when we first met him all those years ago, at the beginning, he said, just be selfish in a way, in the sense, I used to think, well, that doesn't sound good. But he meant, like, you take care of your own happiness and trust that will take care of everybody around you. And like, at that time, we wanted to help the world. That was why we were partly why we're on that search. And when he said that, at first, it didn't make sense to me in my old beliefs, but it's so true. You take care of your happiness.
Yeah.
And it's not selfish. In the terms of the world, it might seem selfish, but it's the most loving thing you can do for the world.
Absolutely. That's a snapshot of how I see how we look at relationships, that I'm not dependent on Jan for my happiness. Jan's not dependent on me for her happiness. And because that's true, we can really be happy together.
That's right.
Very simple, really.
Yeah. And that happiness is actually a state of mind.
Yeah.
It's that place that you're talking about dropping into. It's that being in the now, that it is always there, even if we're not experiencing it. And when we understand that, I know what I've seen for myself is that there's much more willingness on my part when I'm stirred up and feeling unhappy and suffering, to be willing to allow myself to be selfish, which I don't think is selfish, but self-honoring, as maybe what I would say, is to be self-honoring at those times, so that I let my mind relax, so that I can get back to that place of contentment within myself, independent of whatever the circumstances are that may or may not need to be addressed. It's not like we don't address things as well in our lives, but to do that from a reactive place never tends to go well.
Yeah, and there's something about this too for me where if we really embrace and understand that we're responsible for our own happiness and that's how we're showing up in the relationship, then the other party would be able to feel so much more relaxed and relieved that there's no pressure on me here to be anything else other than who I am.
Exactly.
They're not expecting me to be something else. Because if that other person was to believe that their happiness was contingent upon the other person's behavior, that would create a whole bunch of pressure in itself. That I'm sure just creates a dynamic of struggle. Whereas if that person is just like, oh, they seem to be happy. They seem to be doing pretty well for themselves. There's no pressure on me to be anything else other than who I'm being.
But even the flip side of that, Angus, because Angus was one of the dynamics that we had, is that I would get really low, and then Angus would feel like it was his responsibility to try and get me out of my low mood.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Not really because, I mean, yes, he cared about me, but mostly because he didn't like being around me in a low mood. But to be able to realize that, yeah, if one of us is in a low mood, there isn't anything that the other one needs to do. Not that we need to go out of our way to be unkind, but that we can trust that they're going to find their own way and that they have it within them to navigate that, and that we can just hold space for that. And it just takes so much stress off of the relationship.
Yeah, that was such a huge relief for me to be able to take that off the table. That kind of like, you're having your moment, you're having your experience, and that I don't really need to do anything here. And every time in the past where I feel like I would have to do something, it just went south so quickly.
Yeah.
And now I can just leave it alone.
It's trying to help someone in a low mood is never very gratifying.
No.
Same for us, I mean, there are little things like sometimes when I'm in a bad mood, Jan will fix me a cup of tea or something, or ask me if I want to go for a walk. Well, that's okay, but never trying to fix it.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say never. We occasionally do that. As Angus says, It goes south quick.
It's so beautiful that we less and less think about any area of our lives. Like I think less and less about any area of my life that could be improved or just is different than in other parts. I just know that beneath all the realities that we're talking about, there is a true reality that life springs forth from that true essence that we are. Everything springs from there. And if you keep going back to that just being open to learning about that part of you, that true self, like just being open to discovering it, however that process looks, just trusting in life, and that it takes care of everything as our relationship gets nicer, everything in our whole life, like how I operate in my, the business that we run, and how I operate in our community, how I operate in my thoughts about what the government demands from me, like having to pay taxes, like absolutely everything in life gets looked after without having to pay attention to certain areas. That's why we'll talk about how this has helped our relationship, but we know that's just a product of that, getting that quieter mind and that more of an awareness of who we really are before this personal self. It's so, I'm so grateful for that.
Me too.
Yeah, that's it. That awareness of who we are beyond the personal self is going to impact every area of our life. It can't not.
Actually, that's the gift of understanding, is that you don't just see one thing and understand it. It's across the board. When your level of consciousness shifts, you see everything from a different place, from a different perch. And so it's incredible that way. It's so all encompassing, You can't just see one, like, now my marriage is better, but I hate my job. But I love this conversation, and I was going to resist repeating something, but it's just been tickling me lately. Is during you probably saw some of the conference in London.
They
representing it.
Yeah.
And there's a thing that's been hitting me lately where when you find that place inside and you see that it is so simple, you just have to keep going back to that level of consciousness, to that quiet mind, to the now. And every once in a while, I started thinking about this line in this rock and roll song. It's just the one line. I don't know the song, but the line is, I just dropped in to see what condition my condition was in. Right? And that's us. Like, when I thought of that, I started laughing because that was not what I was doing when I thought of it. I was thinking about my condition, right? Where's my thinking? How am I doing? And there's a turning point in this understanding in relationships, but also just in who we are and how we're growing. What Jan was saying is so true. You start giving less and less consideration to your condition. And you drop in to check on it less and less.
I love that.
It's wonderful. It really is.
There's a real freedom in that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, well, I mean, I've just so enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate the simplicity that you're sharing and pointing to. And I really hope that as people listen, that they take that in and recognize that they have exactly what you're talking about within themselves. And that just simply by listening, as you're saying, even to a podcast, when we get quiet and listen rather than think, we're going to hear our own wisdom. That's just how it works. And so I really appreciate you highlighting that and just sharing what you've seen and what you see as key in relationship and helpful, but not just for relationship, but for life.
Yeah, I mean, yes. So you refer to it as simplicity, and obviously it's simple, but it's like you're pointing to beauty and magic. You're pointing to something that's so wonderful, and that's something that you guys do in such a wonderful way. I always love listening to you and how you see the lens through which you see the world and articulate that magic and that beauty and that simplicity.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that feeling is genuinely mutual.
Yes.
We love spending time with you guys. It's
Yes.
great. It's a mutual admiration society.